So my name is Sloan. I'm the executive director of Wilderness Workshop, and I wanted to introduce our speaker tonight because not only is Jim a professional man in his field, doing great work here, and that we're really proud to be partnering with the Aspen Cypress Ranger District on a number of projects, and particularly in supporting their work to get fire back on the landscape. But Jim's also a friend. Our kids go to school together, and it's been great to get to know Jim on a personal basis as well as a professional basis. And anyway, I think Jim does great work. He spends half his year in the fire season out there traveling around the western United States, fighting fire, both good and bad, right? And then the rest of the time he spends planning how to get good fire back on the landscape here in the Roaring Fork Valley. And you'll hear more from Jim about the importance of that, but the Wilderness Workshop is particularly interested in this because fire plays such a critical role in maintaining ecosystem health. And of course, if none of us were here, fire would not be a problem, and it would be burning on its normal natural cycles. But because we're here and we are in harm's way from fire, we have to learn how to live with fire in a way that minimizes its negative impacts and maximizes its positive ecological impacts. So that's what we're doing with a project Jim's going to talk about tonight. But again, I want to emphasize the Wilderness Workshop is really pleased to have a really great relationship with the Aspen Cypress Ranger District, and District Ranger Karen Schroyer's in the room here. Raise your hand, Karen. In a number of ways, but working to get fire back on the landscape is part of that. So without further ado, here's Jim Genung.
Wow, thanks, Sloan. Yep. Can everybody hear me all right? Yep. I like to yell a little or talk loud, so if we're good with that. Well, and the admiration for Sloan is equal. I love the job he does. He's got a tough job to keep us honest, keep the feds honest. He does a good job at it, I think. And so he really summed it up well. So yeah, I spend part of my year, a good portion of my year planning for prescribed fire, which is what a lot of what I'm getting at here tonight is talking about that. But the other part of the year, I work on an incident management team. It's a national incident management team. We respond to some of the really large fires that occur in the West. Some mostly bad, I would say, mostly bad fires, sometimes good fires. And as one of my supervisors on that team says, Jim, he says this every time. He says, Jim, they didn't call us here because things were going well. So that's usually, and it's usually the case. I remember a few really good fires that we worked on, but a lot of times there's situations like this that we're getting into. A lot of homes, the bad fire. But so we go both ways with the good fire and the bad fire, and that's really what we're going to talk about: what's good, what's bad, and how can we find some middle ground in this world that we live in. And like Sloan was saying, if we weren't here, it's a human problem. It's a huge human problem. If we weren't here, it wouldn't matter. We'd have fire all over the place. And to make that happen, we need to develop fire-adapted communities. We need fire-adapted landscapes, which we're working on really well. I think, across the country here, we'll have some acres and statistics down the road in this presentation, but this fire-adapted landscape on the left, that was up in Idaho a couple years ago. That was actually a wildfire, a lightning-started wildfire that went about 250,000 acres or 300,000 acres. A lot of it did real good because the landscape was adapted. It was ready for that fire. And then there's fire-adapted people. This is really, I think, where we're kind of behind a little bit. We're behind in both, but we need to move forward with both these things, and people need to learn to live with fire. It's a hard thing to swallow, but it's not a matter really of if, it's when a fire is really going to come through, especially in the western states where a lot of our landscapes depend on fire. Almost all vegetation types in the western U.S. depend on fire in one way or another, whether that fire comes back every 30 to 50 years, or whether that fire comes back every 400 years. It's coming back. So right now, you can see where we're at here with the average, or the number of fires per season, and the number of acres. We're on the rise since 1980. Everything's going up. Number of acres this year, with Alaska included, was approaching 10 million acres. That's a lot of acres. That's a lot of stuff. About 5 million of those acres were in Alaska, another 5 in the lower 48, and it's in comparison to what happened traditionally or pre-settlement. You know, some people say 20 to 30 million acres burned annually on a low severity type situation, whereas now we're getting these fires that are really high severity fires, burning hot and long times, and burning through communities. So the number's going up, but people are still moving to the woods. And this is kind of the big problem. This picture, I think, if I can recall, it's down by Glenwood Springs somewhere, I think. You can see all brush and pinyon juniper above it, just chock full of all kinds of vegetation around it. This type of thing is happening in Colorado at an increasing rate. About 50,000 homes right now in the very high risk category in Colorado. And by 2030, we will have approximately 2.6 million acres worth of wildland urban interface, as we call it, the WUI. It's the mix where the houses meet the woods and where most of the houses are burning down. And at that point, we'll have over 700,000 homes in the way. That's a lot of houses. Is it going to happen to every one of those houses? I mean, eventually there's going to be fire, you know, pretty much everywhere. Is it going to happen in our lifetime, the next lifetime? That's the question. So the big problem is folks moving to the woods now. How many people live, they think, in the urban interface? Let me see it. Can I see it? Show of hands. Okay. So the other thing is we've had dangerous fuel loadings. Due to the lack of suppression, really. Some things that come to mind are, you know, prior to 1850, there was no roads, there was no railroads, there was no agriculture land out here. There was nothing to break up the fuel. So suddenly a fire that went for days and days and days hits a railroad track and just goes boom. You know, a little grass fire that's been burning from a lightning strike could be burning, you know, hundreds of thousands of acres across the prairie. You know, suddenly it hits a railroad track, a road, an agricultural field, whatever now. It's stopped, and then that next field over suddenly has just missed a cycle. Suddenly everything's missing a cycle. The entire West, everywhere, is missing a cycle. There's lightning strikes that happen all over around here that we're putting out. We've been putting them out for years. Ranchers have been putting them out for 100 years. Every time one of those is put out, we're missing out on a natural opportunity. But what do? We've got all these houses in the woods, and we've come to this this point where so much fuel has built up that the number of and size of fires is increasing rapidly as well. Not just, you know, the numbers of fires, but the actual 10,000 acres or more. In, let's say, 1996, the Buffalo Creek Fire. Does anyone remember that down on the Front Range? It's 12,000 acres. The biggest fire prior to that, does anyone remember the Emerald Lake Fire? That was on the White River National Forest. It's 10,000 acres. It was up by Sweetwater, north of Sweetwater, up there on the east side of the Flat Tops. 10,000 acres, largest fire anybody had ever seen around here, by far. And 1996, Buffalo Creek happened, burned a bunch of houses down. Those were the biggest fires that anyone had seen. Now, 10,000 acres is a drop in the bucket. Hayman fire was 140,000 acres. We've had almost 30 fires well over 10,000 acres just since 2000. So you can see that in a 100-year span, nobody has ever seen a 10,000 acre fire, or we've seen 2. And then in the last 16 years, we've seen fires go over 100,000 acres and probably at least 30 fires over 10,000 acres. So you can see where we're going with this whole situation. It's reaching a point where a lot of places are just at a breaking point. It's just when we get on fires and we look at them and we can't do anything, there's nothing we can do. One of our comments is usually it's just going to do what it's going to do, and we just back off. I mean, we can't do anything. So that's the result there. This was in the 4 Mile fire, which was west of Boulder. The first thing I saw when I pulled up on this fire was a guy had a strap hooked up to his deck, which was on fire, and he was pulling it right off the house. And we helped him put his house out. He got lucky. So that's what's happening. This was down by Silt, actually, 2007. So how did this happen? How did we get into this? Situation? We don't even know what to call it anymore. It's, it blows me away sometimes that what's happening, and it's so hard to quantify and to look at from my perspective as a fire professional. America needs productive forests. Fire protection. This is what started happening in about 1910, 1920. Timber companies, they were afraid of a timber famine because a lot of the East Coast timber was going away. All the timber in the Midwest had been cut to build all those cities. And of course, then, they built it with, all that wood was Chicago, and then Chicago burned down. So they were afraid of a timber famine. There was a lot of people really, really scared of a timber famine that they decided, okay, we're going to put everything out. And there were some people that really, I think even Gifford Pinchot thought, we need to manage these forests somehow with fire because it's out there. But he didn't really win out. This is an interesting slide here, and this is in ponderosa pine, which we don't have a whole lot of around here. It's a different fuel type, but all these little lines represent a fire scar that was marked in this, what we call a cookie, was cut out of this tree. So 1612 is the pith there. Went a long time before it actually saw its first fire. These are natural fires. There's nobody around. This was cut in Arizona. 1659 was its first fire. It ended up with 25 natural fires over 300 years. And that's pretty common. A fire return interval in the ponderosa pine is anywhere from 5 to 25 years naturally. And if you look on the Front Range now, so what happens is that with suppression, putting those fires out, Doug fir starts to come in, and they're shade tolerant, and they start taking over, and they start growing with the ponderosa. And that Doug fir has ladder fuel all the way down to the surface. So it gets in that Doug fir, and it starts getting into the crowns, and then the crowns of the ponderosa burn. And in pre-suppression days, it was just a nice surface fire. It would take out those little trees, and nice surface fire would run right through the litter. And the cambium on the ponderosa pine, super thick. It's fire tolerant, and they're a fire tolerant tree. They depend on fire. Their seeds open up. The cones open up with fire. So you can see all those fires. I mean, there's one that's about 8 years apart, 10 years. Some of them are spread apart a bit, but till 1915, boom. It's about when it started, suppression, and you can see nothing from 1915 on to 1974 when this tree was cut. Just it's like putting a cap over a basin, like the Roaring Fork Valley. It's like putting a lid on it and keeping the water out. Eventually, things are really not going to survive. And we can talk about, we'll talk about our situation here in this valley a little bit more as we get towards talking about Hunter Creek and some of the prescribed fire we're doing. So the Forest Service and other agencies, California State, a lot of state forest services, Park Service, they put together an army to really, any fire was bad fire, when in essence, we needed it. So at one point they had a policy called the 10 o'clock policy. That fire would be out by 10 o'clock the next morning. That was their goal. That was always their goal when they spotted a fire, to put it out by 10 o'clock the next day. So we lived in this, dominant paradigm where we were trying to dominate fire. There was a war on fire. Wildfire was destructive to timber, it was destructive to the land. People thought it was really, destructive to animals. Now we know a lot of what we do with prescribed fire now is wildlife driven. It's really a lot of our wildlife ecosystems are failing because they don't have fire. We wanted to control wildfire. They're escaping our control. And the solution we still think like this. We still think like this. There's still a lot of this that we think because of homes in the way and everything else. We're still putting out a lot of fires. We're still putting out 90% of the fires, natural fires that occur at least, We just can't let them go. So we still have this, this idea that technology is gonna help us. We've got bigger airplanes now. We've got DC-10s as air tankers, We used to use these little Korean era P2Vs, which they still have some, that had 2,000 gallon payloads, and the DC-10s and 747s now have 11,000 gallons of retardant that just keeps going and going and going. And then like the state of Colorado has this new the new airplane down in Rifle, and their center of excellence, and they're talking about all kinds of ways to in my opinion, is to react. And we need those things still. I just don't, we haven't found a way around that. So, this was the dominant paradigm we were living in. And so I've been talking about how this is working for us. It's not really. It's not. Some occasions it does, but the reality is fire wants to be there, and fire's going to be there, whether we, all the things we try to do. And the worst scenarios that I see are places that haven't had fire for a long time. This is Waldo Canyon. So, how's that working for those folks? That burned, right down into Colorado Springs in 2012, right into that subdivision, and far into the subdivision too. Usually we get to these fires and it's the houses on the fringes that are all burned, and this thing went way down one little drainage and started taking houses out and spotting into and throwing embers across the street, and pretty soon we had urban conflagration going on. It was quite a phenomenal event. This guy, I just found this, and they're getting bigger and bigger. But he's saying it's part of the ecosystem. It's just like water. It's got to be there, And here we've tried to take it out. It regenerates plants. I mean, it regenerates the earth. And like I said, a lot of stuff really relies on fire for productivity of the species. So, what are we going to do? Right? So we've come to this conclusion. Well, we haven't come to really a conclusion, I suppose, but we've got ideas. We finally have over the last 30, 40, 50 years, enough people have spoken up, enough science has looked at this stuff, enough firefighters have come forward to realize that we need a new paradigm. The old system just really wasn't effective. We can't hold out doing what we're doing anymore. And as much as, we go places, when I go places with the incident management team, put it out, just put it out. It's fire. I mean, it's hot, right? It burns your stuff up. Put it out. I don't want to see it. I want it out. The smoke, everything. Get it out of here. So we've come up with this new plan, and I'm gonna kind of share the new plan here. Okay? It's a lot better than the old plan. People aren't gonna like it. I think some people don't like it. We're essentially gonna work with fire. This is the wallow fire. And high intensity crown fire burned on this mountain. This wallow fire was down in Arizona. This is the edge of alpine Arizona right here. It burned about 300,000, 400,000 acres, something, whatever. They're calling them mega fires now. Anything over 100,000 acres, they're calling a mega fire. This was a mega fire. But the forethought that I believe the Coconino National Forest had here, actually maybe it's, the Forest Service and the community had in this area right here, was to do some thinning in the ponderosa pine right there. This fire had come a long ways, heading right over this hill. I mean, thousands of acres, miles, coming directly right at this place right here, Alpine, Arizona. They had put a fuel treatment right through here, 5, 6, 7 years earlier, and they'd maintained it. That fire came over the hill right there. It went back down to the traditional fire we used to see in the slide with the cookie of the ponderosa pine that had low severity fire chunking right through there. Firefighters had a bunch of homes right here. They could get in there and just make a stand right there and stop it just as it came to the houses. If that wasn't there, those firefighters certainly wouldn't have gone in there, and these homes would be total loss. So the new paradigm, work with the flow of natural processes, just like what happened right there. They brought it down to a natural process is what they did. They brought fire back into its element, its real element of the way things have been for thousands of years right there. Wildfire is a natural process. Does everybody understand that? Yeah? I mean, I don't want to talk like a teacher, because sometimes I do a lot of teaching too, but I don't want to start, I just want to make sure the public understands that fires, it's here. It's always been here. Fire adapted landscapes. So that's what I'm starting to get at, is that we need to adapt our landscapes, our houses, our communities to live with it. Create fire resilient human and natural communities. We looked at that, unnatural fire from high fuel loadings. It's unsustainable. Develop new holistic approaches to manage fire across boundaries and co-managing risk. So the big one there is across boundaries. At first, a lot of people were doing their own thing. Forest Service would work right up to the fence. Boom. That's it. And you just see these lines. And now we're starting to work more and more with people like ACES, people like Pitkin County, people like the City of Aspen, people like Garfield County. The Nature Conservancy is a huge conduit to all this stuff. They do a lot of really good cross-boundary stuff. So we need to take the political boundaries out. And that, co-managing risk too. So what we're getting at there is, maybe I decide I'm not going to do anything at my house, but a couple houses here, a couple houses there. That's not really co-managing risk. One house tends to catch the next house. So I think I've heard Sloan say this before, is communities that don't mitigate risk together burn together. It's true. I don't know if you said that or not, but I think you did say that. Trying to butter him up a little bit for something. I'm not sure what, but it'll come back to me. So here's what that looks like. Well, one of those things that it looks like is that picture I just showed you. And it doesn't have to be that we're using fire and prescribed fire all the time. We're using fuel treatments, like the wallow fire that I showed you there. That just the fire came back down to the surface, and they saved a lot of houses that way. A lot of pre-planning. So resilient landscapes, fire-adapted communities, and safe and effective wildfire response. So we still have to respond. People still had to go out into that Wallow Canyon deal. Even though the fire came down to the surface, there still had to be firefighters in there, and we still had to evacuate. That's still going to happen. There's no way getting around that. It may get to a point where everybody's so comfortable. I mean, I'd love this if it got to the point where everybody was so comfortable that, oh, here it comes, and they just walk out in their backyard and start squirting a little water out there, and it just stops right at their green grass or their gravel or whatever they have as a fire mitigation measure in their backyard. That would be great. That would save a lot of heartache and a lot of insurance costs, and a lot of stress on me for sure. So what are the things we're going to do is mechanical treatments. We are doing mechanical treatments on the forest. We're doing mechanical treatments on private property. We're doing mechanical treatments in open space. I think we need to do more.
What's a mechanical treatment?
Mechanical treatment, good question. So chainsaws, cutting, limbing, piling, taking out the little stuff, getting the fuels that are going to carry that fire up into the tops of the trees, maybe. Other treatments may be just cutting to remove fuel and trying to get back down to a more manageable level of, say, is everybody familiar with the brush species we have around here, the gamble oak? The number of stems per acre in the gamble oak, I'm pretty sure far exceeds its natural number. I'm pretty sure of that. So, maybe cutting half of that out or a quarter of that out and giving it more of a savanna effect. And taking that stuff, those would be mechanical treatments, just physically taking the fuel out of the woods, using it as biofuel, however you see it. We're using a lot of it for a lot of different things now. Evacuation plans, I just kind of touched on that, but we still need to get people out of the way. It's still fire. If we want to see a safer fire. Creating safe working environments for fire personnel. So, a lot of folks are still losing their lives fighting fire. And they're getting too close. They're trying to defend homes. and it's been a big issue. So, and then safely using and managing natural fire on the landscape. That's what we're talking about, good fire right there. Does anyone know about our management policy that we use here on the White River National Forest about a natural ignition in the wilderness? We don't really put it out. We monitor it. Yeah, and a lot of large fires are being managed that way across the West now. Even in I've seen quite a few in the Southeast as well. Some of the national forests of the Southeast are starting to manage these wildfires. Naturally started, natural ignitions, do its thing, do whatever it's going to do out there. And you know, in our particular fuel type in the wilderness here, believe it or not, the spruce fir that grows in the, like say, the Maroon Bells wilderness has a fire return interval of about 300 to 400 years. So it's, again, fire return interval is how often the fire comes back to the landscape. And it's usually a stand replacing fire in that fuel type. So we do see a lot of smaller fires, though, in the wilderness area, traditionally 20, 30, 40 acre fires that were also healthy for spruce fir and other high alpine species of trees. Responding efficiently to unwanted fire. So we still have a lot of unwanted fire because we're human and it's hot and it burns our stuff up, right? But if we can adapt somehow to that unwanted fire and maybe have it, welcome it a little bit, and I don't want to sound too, corny, but how do you welcome fire through your ranch or through your neighborhood? It's tough. It's going to be a tough thing for folks to swallow. I mean, I see people cringing right now,
What do you mean? They just have to accept it?
Accept it, because we can't do anything about it. Unless we start, maybe some mechanical treatments.
Does logging play some sort of a role in this? Good logging practices?
Good logging practices, yes. I suppose you could say that.
I mean, we used to have them, and we had loggers.
There's not a lot of good timber left around here. A lot. And, I should say marketable timber in this neck of the woods.
Well, you see houses coming off of 4 Mile with some pretty beautiful trees, and they're certainly it's there.
Yeah, but I can tell you there's a lot of loggers that aren't coming here to look for wood anymore. That's for sure. It's just not around here. The ponderosa pine that was here in the 1800s was logged pretty heavily, and that's good wood. But the spruce fir is not a favorite of the timber industry. Other forests, yes. Across the West, and good logging practices, I would say. And one of the real reasons I'm here tonight is to promote prescribed fire. Good fire. Fire on our terms. Fire, it's, I like to look at it as like it's the fire that we have in our box. We're going to let it out for the afternoon and we're going to put it away. And we reduce fuels that way. We use that fire to return some good stuff back to the landscape. What time is it? Oh, there we go. What's that? 20 minutes. Oh, okay. We got lots of time. So here's kind of what that looks like. All in one community. Maybe hard to see. We shrunk our screen down here a little bit. So starting with the built environment, the appropriate home, the appropriate construction, shake shingle roofs, not good.
Are insurance companies starting to require homes to be insured? Do some of these?
In more and more places they are, yeah. And in more and more places I'm starting to see like insurance companies somehow involved in our conversations or at our meetings, representative from the insurance company. So yeah, there is people that are starting to take notice, and I think I've gotten calls actually from folks that or from insurance agents about homes around here, and I can't make that. I work for the federal government on the federal side of the fence, and that's really an insurance thing. But so construction around the home, and it's mostly embers that are starting homes. It's never the fire front. Like something like 76% over a 20-year study. 76% of the houses that burned were from ember fallout. Decks are the worst. You see decks on fire. People have got loads of wood on their deck. And I told you the story about the guy, we just pulled his deck right off the house. The deck was on fire. It drives me nuts. Really, it does. And we'll drive by and say, no, just forget that one, and we'll keep driving. We'll go to the next one. Stuff in gutters. People living in these fire-prone areas with needle cast in their gutters and vents in the attic that are easily accept an ember. Just all kinds of stuff.
Do zoning laws cause conflict? Because I've seen some zoning laws where they say don't cut the space around the house instead of.
Right, yeah. I know there's a subdivision down here. I won't mention the name, and because someone might live there. But I know that a friend of mine moved in there, and they told him, "No, you can't. Don't touch anything." I was like, "You're in a bad spot here, because I can tell you that north of 82 over here is a nice ripe piece of ground all the way to Cottonwood Pass." Pitkin County used to have laws, and they just didn't enforce it. And, I remember helping somebody about 20 years ago with that, when that law came out, and he started cutting around his house and did all what he was supposed to do, and they never came and inspected. And then they never really followed up on that. So I think that's something we need to catch up on in this neck of the woods, really. There's a document called the CWPP. Both Garfield County and Pitkin County have the CWPP. It's Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It's a document that starts to outline this kind of stuff, what we need to do and where we need to go, and we just need to follow through with those things. Zoning's tough. It's America. Hey, leave me alone. Especially if I live way out in the woods. Who wants to be told what to do? I mean, I'd probably be a little, I know what I would do, but other things I might say, hey, no, I'll take care of myself. Don't worry about it. And when things go wrong with that too, it's quite disturbing. Evacuation. I won't dwell too much on houses, and I'll give you a website you can look at after this that has a lot of information if you're interested. Evacuation plan, good evacuation plan, and most city planners and county emergency folks have these in place. How they use them when things really go bad, testing that stuff is tough. It's really tough because people are, everyone from the people that are being evacuated to the evacuators, the evacuees and the evacuators both at times tend to be out of their head. I saw last summer in Idaho, I saw a fire chief rear end the county sheriff during an emergency evacuation, trying to get folks out fast, trying to get folks out of there. Fire's coming. getting everybody out, engines everywhere, people everywhere, airplanes everywhere, and bam, he nailed that county sheriff right in the back, and it was, you know, that's all they need is an injury, you know. So having that stuff in place is, and practicing it. I don't know, the counties, they do stuff, you know, they do a lot of emergency planning and drills and stuff. It's just hard to do when it's the real thing. Access, good access to neighborhoods is huge. Like I said, firefighters are dying. They shouldn't be still. And I'm not even going to drive in there if I don't have good access, because I'm not going to send my folks into that spot. You know, forget it. You think the government's coming to save you, or you think somebody is. You know, we're stepping back. We're not putting ourselves at risk anymore. So access is huge. If you can get in there and work, get some engines in there, and you know, like the Wallow fire where it came down and laid down, folks could get in there and work. They weren't afraid of fire getting over, or their engines getting overrun, and their engine companies getting hammered with fire. It's the best thing there is. I can tell you, it's the best thing there is. And then community protection, fuel breaks, just like we saw in the Wallow fire there. Defensible space, the same kind of thing. Brings that fire to the ground. You know, if you've got good stuff around your house, you know, again, I'll show you the FireWise website. And if you need information on that, you can come talk to me after. Maybe I can distribute or email folks some stuff. But, you know, I've seen fires go unprotected houses, nobody on it, no firefighters. Fire just drops to the ground, comes right up to the house, hits the gravel slope or whatever they've got out there in their yard, and boom, done. No damage other than they've got, you know, some black acres, but no damage done. So that's what it looks like, fire adapted community. Now, I live in town, so I don't worry about this, really. Do people worry about this living in town? I know people have asked me this question before, and I wonder, you know, how close do you have to be to the woods? I mean, that's a judgment call, but, you know, I know where I live, and I got concrete around me pretty well, so I'm not too worried about a wildfire. But, you know, the fire, your local fire department, your local fire chief, your local fire officials. I'd love to come out and look at everybody's house. That's a little outside the scope of my duty. But your local fire officials, and there's money for that stuff too. There's grants. There's state grants for that stuff. So that's it. There's some guys chipping, you know, reducing fuels. Prescribed fire. It's one of the best tools out there. And we're working to get more on the ground here. So people have asked me, how are we going to do this? How does this prescribed fire thing work? How do we do it safely? Because people, that's the number one thing they come. I've had folks ask me in Aspen for this Hunter Creek fire, you know, is there an escape route? What are the evacuation routes that we're using? So, you know, there's a lot of planning that goes into this. And you know, we're using natural breaks like this river. In the case of Hunter Creek, we're going to use snow. We're going to use Hunter Creek itself, and you know, we'll use rock. We'll use as many natural breaks as we can possibly use. And if we can't use that, we use a man-made break like a road, which we also will use in Hunter Creek. You can see the wind direction here. Wind's blowing at that fire. So they started lighting right here and just backing it in, and then these folks here are just going to fill those spots into that fire. So it's a backing fire. A lot of people think we just go out and put it at the toe of the slope and just go whoosh, watch it go up. You know, that's not the objective. The objective is to bring in a low severity fire and reduce fuels. Reduce the fuels that are out there, the fuels that haven't burned, that have been sitting there, that should have burned 40, 50, 60 years ago. That stuff that's just sitting there and accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. No natural fire. We're getting rid of that stuff on a safe as possible way that we can do it. The planning that goes into this starts with, in the case of Hunter Creek, started in about January of 2015. Pretty much planning up until now to where we will probably do some lighting within the next 4 to 6 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks, something like that. The hurdles that go into that are innumerable, I can tell you. Almost daily something comes across my desk that says, hey, I don't like this smoke plan that you have. The state regulates the smoke that we put in the air from a prescribed fire. And they regulate how many acres we can burn and when we can burn, and a lot of other things that really makes it tough. Can't just go out there, you know, wake up in the morning and say, ooh, we got a good wind today. Let's go out and throw some fire out there. You know, I wish we could, because I think we could probably do it safely. But we've got this down, you know, really down to a science. You know, how close do we get to houses with prescribed fire? You know, we can't use it super close. That's where we start using mechanical treatments in conjunction with prescribed fire to kind of mimic that fire without putting fire out there. Up here in Avalanche Creek, we're going to be doing a prescribed fire. We'll probably start on Friday with just a little bit. But there's a couple of resource issues up there. There's a peregrine nest up above Redstone, you know, that doesn't like helicopters and doesn't like smoke. You know, that's a pretty big issue. You know, we've got to put about a half a mile to a mile radius around that thing, and visually, for days, have a biologist maybe just go up there and take a peek and see if that thing's even around. You know, we've got noxious weeds, and weeds love fire, especially thistle. You put fire out there where there's thistle, and there's more thistle when you come back in the spring, you know. So there's this whole environmental assessment that we need to do before we even think about writing a burn plan. So there's a lot of limitations. You know, the federal government, and I don't want to get too much into policy with this because this is kind of, you know, they're trying to ease up on us a little bit so that we can do it safely and effectively. You know, really promoting the reduction of hazardous fuels, especially in the urban interface. So, you know, we live in a more adapted situation, adapted fire. So, anyways, you know, I do want to talk a bit about Hunter Creek prescribed fire and how that's all going to work, and I'll take questions here in a minute.
Yeah, and when we do, we just want to use the microphone
Okay.
with these guys.
Okay. So, you know, the objective with the Hunter Creek prescribed fire is kind of twofold. What we have up there, like I said, is a place that hasn't seen really any fire in maybe 100 years, maybe 150 years, maybe 200 years, I don't know. Hard to tell with that kind of the mountain brush that we have around here. So, you know, it's in a place that's kind of right on the edge of the wilderness, really. If we were to get a wildfire in the wilderness, this is going to help us give us some space from fire coming down out of the Hunter Frying Pan Wilderness and into Hunter Creek and then into Aspen. It's just one piece of that puzzle. The other piece is wildlife. Wildlife, the big game, elk, when they walk around a big patch of oak brush now, they're really just, they don't like the flavor anymore because it's old and decadent. They won't eat it. They use it for shading and stuff, and if they can get through it, So Aspen's kind of the same way, that when we burn, this stuff comes up. The old dead stuff, the big stuff falls away, and the new sprouting happens in the Gamble Oak. In the first year it's like this, and they go crazy in that stuff. I mean, finally they're back, up on, who saw the smoke from Basalt Mountain last spring? Okay. Yeah, that I wish I should have brought some pictures of that too, but we have a picture on the, okay. The end result of that was some browse, some suckering in the aspen that was just incredible last summer. And the elk used to wander all over up there in Missouri Heights, and they've gone back to their winter range, which is up on the hill there, over the last 30 years that we've been burning up there. So it's really been impressive to see. And the fire modeling I've done with that, with some of the areas up there is incredible, because it actually shows a reduction in the length of the flames, the rate of spread, how fast a fire moves. It comes off the private property down below that hasn't been treated and hits up on the hill up there, and it just really just falls on its face. So it really is protecting the community again from wildfire coming off of Basalt Mountain and down into the community. And then the wildlife benefits are incredible. So that's, I think as the last real point locally I want to make, and then we'll take some questions here, is, our biggest danger here with fire, or our biggest challenge with adapting to fire in this valley is kind of below 8,000 feet and in the brush, the mountain brush, the pinyon juniper, sagebrush communities. That's where we're going to get bit. That's where we've been bit before. The fire up on Missouri Heights, Storm King, those type of fires, coal seam. That's where it's going to bite us again, is in the brush, the lighter fuels, and that's where we need to become adapted to living with fire. So with that,
So for grassroots, we'd like to use the microphone, so
there's a map, and I have some websites on there too if people want that later. It's hard to see.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, you earlier in slides referred to natural fires, like from Mother Nature caused.
Lightning.
So what is the, what kind of a trend are you seeing either way with man-made fires? I mean, or so-called accidental fires or carelessness.
Well, I can tell you here locally, we've never had a real big problem with human-caused fires, which, is pretty good. I mean, we deemed coal seam a human-caused fire, which, it was a fire that was started in 1920 or something, or 1890, or whenever that seam caught fire, and that was due to mining. But we don't have a problem here, and I think nationally, it's I don't know that it's changed that much. There's always the fire bugs out there. There's always the arsonist. There's always the power line that throws an arc. There's always a chainsaw. There's always a blade of a dozer. There's always campfires. We put out a lot of campfires on the forest. We do put out a lot of campfires unattended that people have just left. So we have a lot of that. But I think we're probably declining nationally, but we still have, there's still arson fires Yeah. And the Smoky campaign did a lot for that, you know, I mean.
You showed us first that house that was burned all around. Would you talk a little bit about their architectural setup and why that house
Right.
was?
You know, Adobe, from what I've seen, is, you know, Adobe's one of the best, you know, structures that I've seen of saved houses in a otherwise bad situation. Adobe's has been the best. You know, no. I mentioned decks. I mentioned all these little things that are around your house that are able to catch fire. The vents, you know, screening in your vents, screening in your decks, or maybe no deck at all, or the new decks, you know, like Trex, that kind of material ignites. It does not ignite as easily. It can get hot enough to burn, but it does not ignite as easily as, you know, redwood or something. So it's just thinking about those materials that aren't going to burn that you have around your house, and then the spacing of vegetation away from your house. You know, a 30-foot buffer of nothing is really ultimately best, and rock right up to the edge of your house. But you know, there's things out there, and firewise.org is a great website. It's a federal website that has tons of information, tons of examples, if you're interested in improving the structure of your house. But shake shingle roofs, that County Road 100 fire a couple years ago down here, I found myself on the roof of that house right over there by Catherine's store with a hose from the house, putting out these little dime spots everywhere. Because the embers were coming out of this cottonwood tree right next to the house and just landing on the roof. And it was shake shingle roof, you know? And it used to be, you know, that was a great thing to do, put shake shingle roofs up. And, you know, we were having big snow years and skiing was great and there was no fires and, you know, let's put a shake shingle roof up.
Anybody else?
Does that help? Yeah? Adobe's been the best though. Anything non-wood. Go ahead.
On the Hunter Creek prescribed fire, do you have any time frame when the fire would happen? And the second part of the question is, do you have any time frame after the fire is done when we would be able to hike up there?
Yeah, so, you know, right now, as far as timing goes, it's really hard to nail down because the weather is our biggest, you know, we've got a prescription. We call it a prescription. And that goes into that prescription is environmental and weather parameters. You know, the wind, the relative humidity, the temperature. Really, then what I'm looking for is how much snow has come off there into, you know, so it's above in the timber, so that when it comes out of the brush and it hits those slopes that has snow on it, boom, goes out. That's what we're looking for. Also, we're looking for fuels. You know, the grass and the leaf litter, because that's really that's going to carry this fire. Is the grass and the leaf litter. It's really a grass and leaf litter fire that ends up it kills the bole of the gamble oak trees here and there, and you know, maybe over 50 to 70% of the area will be burned like that. So I would say right now with the weather we're having, and if I had a magic 8-ball and it came up, it would say April 9th. But I'm going to say between April or March 30th and April 20th right now. And then, you know, I'll try to get the word out, you know, when I really start seeing a window for sure. We'll try to get as much information out as a press release or something that, you know, hey, in the next 5 to 7 days, we're going to be looking at this. And then really 2 to 3 days before we'll have a really good idea. And then as far as getting back up there, the second part of your question, you may not even know anything happened at 5 in the afternoon that day. That smoke will hopefully just be all gone. And within 1 to 2 to 3 days, you know, we may go up there early and do some what we call black lining, which is extra security on a maybe cooler day. Put some fire down that'll go out and maybe give ourselves like a 20 to 30 yard kind of buffer along an area where we don't have good containment. So that's an extra buffer we have there. But as far as the main fire goes, you know, 1 to 3 days. You know, if we can go up there the next day and we don't see any smoke or anything going on, yeah, and you know, it should be fine. Yeah.
One more follow-up.
Okay.
What about the structures that are in this area?
Um,
Because there are some old structures.
oh yeah, the old historic structures. Yep. Oh yeah, we'll do some protection around those. We probably won't. The two big cabins that are right there in Hunter Creek. We won't be bringing fire down that far into the meadow. We'll be bringing fire right down to the toe of the slope. We'll probably place an engine there that's grass around there. If we were to get something kind of getting close there, we would probably put a wet line or a foam line in the grass around it and then light off away from it like that. I don't foresee that as a problem. I think we're just going to bring it down to the toe of the slope right there. Okay. Yeah, it'll be it's a real mellow fire, you know. It's not like a CNN fire, you know. It's not the CNN bad fire. You know, CNN shows a lot of bad fire. They never show a good fire, do they? They show the bad fire. It's like the bad war, everything else. Go ahead.
Thanks for a great
Does that
talk.
answer your question? Yeah? Okay.
Thanks for a great talk and all your hard work. I was curious about the avalanche fire or the plan.
Oh, Avalanche Creek?
Yeah.
So that's another good reduction of fuels and as well as habitat improvement up there. Both the sheep and the big, you know, the other big game, deer and elk. So that probably, I'm planning on getting up there and doing what I just talked about, some black lining, where we put some buffers out there Friday. It's really dry in the Crystal again. Not sure what's going on up there, but I mean, I know it's dry everywhere now, but you know, as the snow comes off, we've got good conditions up there right now. It's not getting too hot yet. And so we're going to start in there on Friday. Hopefully, I'll have a final answer tomorrow, and that'll be less than 100 acres for sure, probably less than 50 acres, but putting in, like I said, some black line, some buffering areas where we get some black on the ground where fire can't get past that, because once it's burned, it's not getting past that. So we're going to do a little bit of I just call it a little surgical firing in there Friday, maybe Saturday. And then same thing, you know, weather's coming back middle of next week, looks like maybe snow, back to some springtime weather anyways. So that's how we do it. We look at these cycles of and I try to find a window. I started to see that, you know, we get 4 or 5 days of drying. On that 4th or 5th day, we can start to go after some stuff. And as spring goes on, then as we get into about May 1st, May 10th, something like that, green grass is just getting to be too much, and we can't burn anything. It's too much green grass.
Ooh, I'm